Hi, everybody. I hope you're all well. Over the last few years, as I've rewatched this week's film, The Awful Truth, it's become one of my all-time favourites. Remarriage is one of the classic screwball comedy tropes, and knowing the talent involved in this film, even just reading the one-sentence plot summary on IMDb, you know that you are in for an absolute treat. Unfounded suspicions lead a married couple to begin divorce proceedings, whereupon they start undermining each other's attempts to find new romance. I think I first saw the film 7 or 8 years ago in the BFI's screwball comedy season, but the most memorable time was a couple of years ago in Paris in one of the great little repertory cinemas on the left bank. Watching comedy with an audience always seems to enhance the enjoyment of a film, and obviously, while we can't do that right now, I think you'll still find The Awful Truth absolutely hilarious while watching it at home. The film came out in 1937, and it's always a bit glaring to see such glamour on screen at the height of the Great Depression. But the director Leo McCarey felt audiences would enjoy watching rich, well-to-do people having troubles in their own lives. And he was right. The Awful Truth became one of the top-grossing films of the year, as well as winning him the Oscar for Best Director. The Oscar-nominated script was written by Vigna Delmar, who McCarey had collaborated with on his other great film of 1937, Make Way for Tomorrow. The Awful Truth is also widely regarded as the movie that finally made Cary Grant a star. There's a wonderful quote from Pauline Kael about Grant. "We smile when we see him. We laugh before he does anything. It makes us happy just to look at him." All of that charm and joy is evident in The Awful Truth. In 1931, the Paramount boss B.P. Schulberg ordered the Bristol-born Archibald Leach to change his name to something that sounded more all-American. And just between 1932 and 1937, he made more than 2 dozen films, though I would challenge you to name many of them. It wasn't until this film that so many of the quintessential Cary Grant characteristics came together. Yet immediately after The Awful Truth, he was in Bringing Up Baby with Katharine Hepburn, and then had an incredible run of just a few years that included Holiday, Gunga Din, Only Angels Have Wings, His Girl Friday, and The Philadelphia Story. A great deal of what made Cary Grant was down to Leo McCarey. McCarey was a Hollywood veteran. He was the man who suggested teaming up Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, and had been their supervising director for many years. He directed the Marx Brothers classic Duck Soup in 1933, and also another favourite of mine, the 1935 comedy Ruggles of Redcap with Charles Laughton. McCarey was a good-looking, urbane, debonair sort of chap, clearly the type of person Cary Grant aspired to be, and a lot of the mannerisms and behaviour you see Grant display in The Awful Truth, he mimicked from McCarey. It's also worth remembering when you watch the film that Grant had been part of an acrobatic troupe at the Bristol Hippodrome in his youth, and The Awful Truth gives him an incredible showcase for his abilities as a physical comedian. There are plenty of masterfully timed pratfalls to enjoy here. These were slapstick elements that McCarey specifically incorporated from his years making comedies during the silent era. There's quite a lot of funny business with bowl hats in the film, which I'd be very surprised wasn't a direct result of McCarey devising routines for all those Laurel and Hardy films in the 1920s. Remarkably, Grant wasn't sure he was up to the job of mixing romance and broad comedy, and after filming had already started, he offered the Columbia boss Harry Cohn $5,000 in cash to buy his way out of the film. He even suggested swapping roles with Ralph Bellamy, who plays the other man in the film, Dan Leeson, the down-home oil man from out west. Thankfully, he was convinced otherwise, though it led to a testy relationship between McCarey and Grant. One of the things that made Grant nervous was McCarey's preference for improvisation. He complained that no one knew what was going on except McCarey, and I get the impression that's probably how McCarey liked it. In Peter Bogdanovich's book, Who the Devil Made It, which is a great collection of interviews with directors, McCarey says, "Almost every scene was improvised. A lot of times we'd go into a scene with nothing. We knew where it would fit in, but we had such a tight schedule. I'd say, see everybody at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I'd go home not knowing what we were going to do. I'd say, well, I know that there's a knock on the door and Irene Dunne opens the door and admits Cary Grant, so let's put the camera here and I'll see what to do in the morning. I mentioned Irene Dunne just then. I haven't forgotten about her. She'd seen herself really as a dramatic actress, but the year before this made another comedy that I'd really recommend, Theodora Goes Wild, which she was Oscar nominated for and gave her the confidence to pursue more comic roles. And we can see how adept she is within that improvisational style I mentioned of McCarey's. She was also so dedicated to her vocal talents that she had it contractually stipulated that her films must include at least one song for her to perform. The critic Molly Haskell has written, "If ever there was a heroine capable of self-definition, it's Dunne's Lucy Warriner." And she called the character one of the great female protagonists with a voice of her own. One of the delights about Dunne and Grant as an on-screen couple is that they're clearly equals. They're both fun-loving, passionate and intelligent, although she's probably a bit more smarter than he is. But in that way, they remind me a lot of my favourite, I think, married couple in cinema, Nick and Nora Charles from the Thin Man movies, which brings me to the final star of The Awful Truth I want to mention. Quite a few of you who watched Umberto D at the start of the lockdown told us how attached you were to Umberto's dog, Fleeca. Well, if you're a dog lover, you are going to flip out while watching The Awful Truth. Grant and Dunne's terrier, Mr. Smith, is not only a pivotal plot device, but also an inspired comic performer. He's played by one of Golden Age Hollywood's greatest canine actors, Skippy, who also appeared in the Thin Man films as Nick and Nora's pet, Asta, and a year after The Awful Truth was seen as the pup belonging to Katharine Hepburn's aunt in Bringing Up Baby. I know some of you will want to know more about Skippy, and on our website I've linked to a terrific video essay by the critic David Cairns that you'll enjoy a great deal, I think. I've also added a few other links related to the films that you might want to look at too. The great screwball comedies were all made during the Great Depression, and as Joel McCrea's lead character eventually finds out in Sullivan's Travels, there's a lot to be said for making people laugh. So, as we live through our own very testing times, I really hope that you find The Awful Truth something of a tonic and that you'll enjoy it as much as I do. As always, do please get in touch with us and let us know what you think of the film. We are really, really enjoying hearing from you while we're not able to see you in person. So, stay safe, viddy well, enjoy the film.